Have you ever wondered about the history of the encounters and ships you frequently find in Space Engineers? About the history of the Sol system? Why are there so many space pirates? Where are all these shipwrecks coming from? Do the business shipments even go anywhere? They just kind of drift around. I mean, I know they do, but like, in lore, do they even go anywhere? Really, like, what I mean? Why is anything the way it is?
The only reason that we set up a red base here is because they have a blue base over there. And the only reason they have a blue base over there is because we have a red base here.
If you play through the starting scenarios, you'll kind of vaguely learn about some feud with the ROS and the ITW, and there's also some talk about a Sol cooperative faction. I'm kind of just going to ignore that for this video, only because these factions really only exist within these scenarios, and within, maybe, you might even say they exist within the lore of Space Engineers, because they're on, like, the posters and stuff, but you could also argue that they're also just made for the scenarios, so it could really go either way, but I more or less want to talk about the ships and encounters you find in all the sandbox scenarios. Although it would be cool if they use these factions more with the encounter spawning and stuff, especially since they have a little bit of lore already. Could make for a nice middle step between the Factorum and then just like the regular like cargo ship encounters and space pirate bases you can find. But the only factions we really have for the sandbox scenario are sort of vague, randomly generated factions. Which, by the way, I didn't know the factions in the like regular sandbox scenarios were randomly generated, but according to the wiki, the names and colors of the economy factions are randomly generated, drawn from a list of terms that are stitched together to create unique phrases and four-letter faction tags. Examples of such random names are Supreme Shipbuilding, Interstellar Technologies. Am I the only one that didn't know that? Well, since these factions are randomly generated, there's really not much information on them either. The new Factorum faction have a small amount of lore you can find throughout the encounters, but that still doesn't really explain where all these pirate stations or shipwrecks come from. Look for a while for any sort of information on the origin of the space pirates, or anything similar, and I really couldn't find anything. I wasn't sure if Minor Wars and Space Engineers were related. If you're not familiar, Minor Wars is the game being made before Space Engineers. It's on V-Rage 1. Space Engineers takes place in 2077, Minor Wars takes place in 2081, so the timelines are pretty close there. Well, of course, Space Engineers and Minor Wars are not related, or at least not related anymore, but at one point in early development, I think they were. In Minor Wars, in 2070, the Euro-American Confederation, stupid name by the way, launched Project Genesis, and in their attempts to harness the power of the sun, well, of course something went wrong, blah blah, gravitational, quantum collapse, whatever. Seriously guys, mess around with crazy supervillain ideas like harnessing the power of the sun and find out, I guess. 7 years after this is when Space Engineers takes place. Now hear me out. In the early development of Space Engineers, back in early access, planets were never planned for the game. Planets were only added after high community demand.
The funny thing is that we actually were not planning to implement planets to Space Engineers, and we decided to implement planets after we saw that the community really wants it, then we changed our mind.
And thankfully so they listened, and we actually have the amazing game we have now with good devs who actually take community feedback. But my point here is there's too many similarities with the timeline and the original plan for Space Engineers to say at one point they weren't related, even if it was only for a brief time, and this perfectly explains the high frequency of pirate ships and shipwrecks that can be found throughout the Sol system. Who knows how many colonies they had across all the planets in the Sol system at this time, and with all these people being forced to rush into space, not many of them cut out to be, well, Space Engineers, it makes perfect sense that you would see pirates and shipwrecks every 10 to 15 kilometers just floating around. Alright, well of course the two games are no longer related, and this is entirely speculation, but I think it's fun to think that the space pirates and the ship debris you can find are remnants from a game long dead. It gives a little life to these otherwise lifeless factions, in my opinion. I put a lot of work into this video. Leave a like if you liked it, or if you think it's interesting, or let me know what you think in the comments below. You can also subscribe if you want to see more content from me. I'm really curious to see how this video does. I don't normally do videos like this. I'll see you dudes later. Woo! Woo!
Oh, that happened, and that is awesome.